And we're live. I'm Terry Cooke. You're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs. We're back to talk about stuff that matters in Hamilton. And this week we're talking about the future of light rail transit and its both immediate and long-term benefits and some of the challenges of getting there. And I have two folks who are uniquely positioned to offer some commentary and to have some discussion about where we're at. Colette Murphy from the Atkinson Foundation in Toronto. Colette, welcome.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us. And Paul Johnson. You know what? Close enough. Close enough for refereeing.
Some days it's nice not to have people know who I am.
Paul Johnson from the City of Hamilton, who's the project coordinator on the light rail transit file. Boy, that's great. Right out of the gate, a guy that I've known for a long time. I get his name wrong, but that's about where we should be. I want to talk about community benefit agreements, but before I do that, Colette, you're not as well known in the Hamilton audience, and I want you to talk a little bit about the Atkinson Foundation, which has a rich and deep history of giving and making a difference in the country. Tell us about you and the foundation that you run.
Sure, thank you, and it's great to be here today in Hamilton with you. The Atkinson Foundation has been in the business of social and economic justice for close to 75 years. Our founder was a worker at the largest daily in Canada, the Toronto Star, before he was actually its owner. And he was far more interested in changing the headlines on things like worker rights or access to health care than he was on building a media empire. Today, the foundation continues his work with one key focus, which is on building stronger movements for decent work and shared prosperity. And I guess the one thing I would say about myself in this work is that I think, like the Hamilton Community Foundation demonstrates, I've always seen the power in philanthropy as being more about the people in terms of driving change than the money itself. And so
true.
That's, why I'm here in this work. So.
And you're not a stranger to this community, and that
No.
we've worked together on various projects, and it's good to have you here talking about the potential benefits of light rail to Hamilton.
Thank you.
Paul Murphy, or Johnson, or whatever we're calling this. I teased you earlier by saying you're well known for your work at Wesley as a volunteer with projects like the United Way annual campaign and through your neighborhood's work for the City of Hamilton. But light rail transit, you're obviously not the guy driving the vehicles or laying the track. What do you know about it, and how'd you land in this exciting job?
And it's a good thing I'm not on the technical side all the time because we get a very different project than the one we're hoping for.
I used to run a regional government. My expectations are moderated.
I think the number one reason on the resume, born, raised, educated in Hamilton. I've seen a lot of the development that's going on in Hamilton. Working at Wesley, it was about how do we connect the most vulnerable in our community with a chance to take that next step forward, whatever that is, the right kind of housing, the right kind of supports, getting people jobs in this community, and that step up. Joined the city to spearhead the Healthy Neighborhoods program, now called the Neighborhood Action Strategy, and that was about working with neighborhoods and with folks like yourself to say, how do we build that collaborative spirit about moving Hamilton forward? I love the LRT project because it's not just one thing. It's not just a transit initiative, although it's really important to move people well across the city, as we know. It's not just an economic development initiative, although we know it will drive some increase around the economy, not only along the route, but I think just generally in Hamilton. People want to relocate where their business and their opportunities, where there's great transportation. And it's also got an opportunity, I think, to really continue this work we're doing around making our neighborhoods really healthy places. That's why I'm involved, and I couldn't be happier, and it's exciting times in Hamilton.
It strikes me that this is a game-changing opportunity. And a quick personal story, because you knew my grandpa, Frank Cooke, who both was the general manager of the Street Railway and until his death last June at 101, a great champion of transit in Hamilton. And I'd love to tell the story that he wrote a letter to the editor about the importance of light rail transit and getting it right in the last 6 months of his life to the Spectator. And I think it's exactly that kind of vision, not just thinking about the short-term immediacy of, how do we build a building or how do we move people from A to B, but rather thinking about how do we build a city, a stronger, richer place for all of us, that allows all of us to maximize our potentials and our capabilities that this thing potentially represents to us. And that's why it's so exciting to try and learn from other jurisdictions who have, you know, had the on-the-ground experience. And Colette, I want you, because you become, with your work at your foundation, a bit of an expert on community benefit agreements. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about their origin in other jurisdictions, and then specifically about the Eglinton LRT and what you're attempting to accomplish there.
Sure, thank you. So a community benefit agreement is just that. It's an agreement between a developer and a group of residents that outlines the benefits that the residents will receive as a result of a project, like the building of an LRT. It usually includes three things, or one or a combination thereof. Employment, so training, apprenticeships, opportunities for first source hiring for local residents, affordable housing in some instances, depending on the project, or the third type of benefit that we often see is neighborhood improvements, so environmental remediation, or else maybe a new community center. And they try to target those residents who haven't historically benefited from a city's growth, like young workers, newcomers to a city, or low-income workers, and to send benefits their ways. They have their origins in California, in both transit and housing development, major development processes there. And today you find them that they're part and parcel of how the city does business there. We also see community benefits in places like Scotland, where if you're doing business with government today, you're going to be looking at how you're going to provide benefits to a local community. And what they really try to do is extract the most benefit possible from an infrastructure project. So, for example, world-class infrastructure like the LRT, on time, on budget, while also trying to make local communities stronger and leaving them better off than when the plows and cranes came in the first place.
And what was the catalyst? How did that conversation begin?
Well, in Toronto, it started in northwest Toronto in a neighborhood probably like many you've got here in Hamilton, Weston Mount Dennis, a neighborhood that had been experienced quite significant plant closures, deindustrialization of the neighborhood, a really vibrant, dynamic community, but it was also facing a really significant challenge of high unemployment, over 12%, one of the highest in the city. But it also was in the path of the soon-to-be shovel and ground Eglinton light rail transit, a 19-kilometer train that was going to run across 5 low-income neighborhoods in the city. And a group of civic actors, so residents, community groups, local labor, employment agencies came together and formed something called the Toronto Community Benefits Network to advance this idea of we can do double duty with our dollars in our city and neighborhoods too, and we can deliver this transit, but we also need to be thinking about the benefits that we can deliver to the community. And in this instance, they were really interested in having 3 things. They wanted local apprenticeships. They wanted apprenticeship opportunities, because that creates not just jobs, but careers, really good careers in the trade. They wanted to have professional, administrative, and technical design jobs, possibly going to foreign-trained professionals who are living in the communities. And the third piece they were interested was in local procurement, particularly for social enterprises.
Paul, that sounds an awful lot like the debate and the opportunity that we find ourselves with here in terms of the neighborhoods immediately affected by the light rail transit proposal, the opportunities to talk about residual and lasting benefits. How do we start that conversation here?
Well, the good news is that, working with Metrolinx, who already have experience in Eglinton, there's sometimes you want to be the first out. It's sometimes nice not to be the first out. And so in many instances, our LRT project will learn from where others have gone. For instance, really important, what Colette's talking about, that it gets built in before you get through your procurement phases. Backing out of that, and we saw this in the stadium. We tried late to inject some things in our stadium conversation, and the bottom line was that the the builder, forget all the rest of the debate, but the builder quite rightly said, look,
that's not part of the deal.
We bid on this. If you want to change this, then you change everything, and it's too late. So we don't have a project agreement in place yet. We don't have our project-specific output specification document done yet. So we've got opportunities to do that. So that's great. And Metrolinx is presupposed for that conversation. They, as the 100% funder through the provincial government or the entity that's providing that funding, they need to be on board too, because they're handling the procurement process. So those are some good news things. We'll try and work and make sure that we've got that local group helping to inform us. Mohawk College is a tremendous partner if you think about what we need to be doing now. Let's prepare people for what's coming. We're going to have a large construction cycle on this. We're also going to have other types of construction cycles go through for other projects. So what can we do now from a training, getting people ready, of course, then building in some of those expectations. But finally, I think the other piece we're doing, Terry, is we're actually using the principles of community benefit agreements right now. Let me give you an example. So we knew the challenge we had was how do we have a personalized conversation with every property owner along our LRT route. And it's in and around 1,000 properties, and we wanted to not just show up when something's happening or construction's about to start. We wanted to show up regularly. We did two things. We did it a Hamilton way and a community development outreach model. But then we said these folks that will be going out sharing information, why can't we hire them and hire, not ask for volunteers, hire them from the local communities, pay them a living wage, provide education not only about LRT but about how you do community outreach, how to deal with sometimes tricky situations or perhaps even volatile situations, not in a physical violence way, but LRT elicits strong emotions.
Really?
So those skills development are really critical.
Or in the hammer.
Yeah.
It wouldn't generate strong emotions.
You know, these things that we've talked about here, yes, it's not a written agreement, it's not in our, but we can use these principles already. And so the fact that we're going to employ some folks in these part-time jobs at a living wage level, give them training and skill development is a situation where you can see in Hamilton we're already preconditioning ourselves to do this. Then when we get to the heavy stuff, let's make sure those are in a solid way in the project. Our council wants to make sure that that happens. There's a commitment to it. Between the roundtable, folks like yourself at the foundation, as I say, Mohawk College, the Neighborhood Action Strategy, we've also got the players that may not today call themselves the Hamilton Community Benefit Group, but essentially they're working that way, and they all want the best out of this project.
So, great setup. Colette, it strikes me that one of the challenges coming to the table, and I remember you talking about people who would show up with their tool belts for these initial consultations with an expectation that I'm not here to structure an agreement, I'm here because I need a job, which is in a place of high unemployment, an entirely logical behavior. But how do you equip the folks on the ground with the information necessary to deal with both senior levels of government that can be complicated and bureaucratic, and consortiums from the private sector that know how to eat your lunch and know how to structure agreements to ensure that they don't necessarily share all the pieces of the sandwich together. So how do you make sure that it's a conversation that will allow an equal level of expertise to play itself out in some kind of a fair deliberation? How's it work?
Well, like all great collaborations, it's messy sometimes, Terry. And I think that, I mean, what Paul said really rings true for me. There's a whole lot of people who need to show up at the table and be ready to work differently together in order to do this well. For us, we had a community-driven process that in 2014, the provincial government and Metrolinx sat down with them and set out the expectations for benefits in a framework. So that was the first stage. And the community had other partners helping them to think about, okay, how do you come into this kind of a discussion? What's the development process? How does a development process work? So, you know, people are educating themselves on that piece. And so you're drawing on all the expertise of your broader networks. We were very lucky that Metrolinx was keen and came on side very quickly. But I think, as Paul was saying, we're the first ones at the gate, and so we've been all learning as we go. 2014, they communicated those expectations in the RFP process to the consortia that were bidding. And the Toronto Community Benefits Network got to go and make presentations to the two consortia, which was another great step in our process. And then the really heavy lifting begins, where you're actually negotiating what are the targets going to be and what are the accountability mechanisms, because we all know if all that is in the agreement is good intentions, best effort.
Good luck.
Good luck. And that's really one of the things we've learned from folks who've been at this 20, 25 years in other jurisdictions. If you don't have those things in place and a good monitoring and compliance system, we fall back to old patterns. And
perfect note to go to a break. I'm talking about community benefit agreement, light rail transit in Hamilton with Paul Johnson from the City of Hamilton, Colette Murphy from the Atkinson Foundation in Toronto. We will be right back after this break. I'm Terry Cooke, and you're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs.
Soon we will end MS. Thanks to Canada's leading role in treatment and research, we're closer than ever to reaching the cure. But the road to that goal starts here, with you. Register today at mswalks.ca, because your step could be the one that ends MS.
And we're back. I'm Terry Cooke. You're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs. I'm with Colette Murphy and Paul Johnson from the City of Hamilton. We're talking about light rail transit, both the immediate discussion and debate in Hamilton that is always lively, but more importantly, the potential, in my opinion, to structure a community benefit agreement that ensures that there's a broad benefit by many citizens to this billion-dollar construction opportunity. So, Paul, I'm going to throw it to you and ask you to talk us through the process that the city is presently involved with Metrolinx, and identify some of the points of intersection potentially to have this broader conversation about how does everybody potentially win by virtue of what we're doing here.
Sure. Well, for a project that's about 8 years in length, it feels like it's about an 8-week process. I say it'd just be nice to hit something on our project plan that we don't feel we're already behind on. It's a fast pace. So last May, announcement about the money in May of 2015. Yep. The fall started to do the technical work, updating. Of course, in this community, we've talked about LRT before. We had part of it. The route was a bit changed by the provincial government announcement, but generally speaking, much of it is in place. We're excited because next week, last week of April into the first week of May, we're going to be sharing the alignment of our LRT project, starting to talk about what LRT is going to mean in terms of changes of patterns for people moving around the community. Yep. And then that enters us into the public conversation process in the fall and heading into the early part of 2017, where people get to dig into the plans for our LRT. Tell us what makes sense. And this is also where I think some of this community benefit work can happen. You know, locating crossings, locating stops is really important to be building the community, because what happens around, particularly stops for LRT, is important, and how we link those into to things along the way happen. While we're doing all that work, we are starting to build, though, the real financial end of it and the procurement end of it, which is what are we going to say we want to build? So all the technical stuff that has to go into that. But that's also where you get the chance to say, and this is how we want it built. And that's just not making sure it's a great organization that's going to build it well. It's how do we mitigate construction? We can put in a bit of the pieces around construction and timing, but leave it open to the consortium to figure out how they're going to do it. But the other side of it is, so how are we including some in that? So that's where a lot of these employment, apprenticeship opportunities can get built in. I think right now is when we have to start opening people's eyes to what is required from an LRT perspective. It's wonderful to talk about employment, but there are certain jobs and certain things in life that just aren't going to be part of an LRT project.
Right.
So where is it that people who are maybe thinking about their career and right in the heart of that, how are they going to be ready in a year or two once we start to get going? We hope to finish the procurement process by the middle of 2018. That means that we'd be then gearing up for major construction in 2019. But let's face it, by 2018, some things could be happening with the major stuff starting in 2019 through to our first service date we think will be sometime around 2024. So that's the time frame. People have a chance to get ready. I think we should also be talking about the public realm around the LRT corridor. And there is within the funding announcement with all LRT projects some money for public realm. This may not build affordable housing, it's not going to build a recreation center, but it is going to help us link some of those things together and do the kinds of pieces of work that can make neighborhoods better places. So how will it link with pedestrian events, with developing ways that people can move around their community, biking, that kind of thing. So we're on a path now, Terry, where I think the work on community benefits has to happen in short order. I think once we start to announce, here's what we're trying to build and here's what we're trying to do, then we can start a bunch of these conversations around how do we include the community benefit piece within it. And that's where we'll be reaching out to the community to help us around that. But as I say, it's great that we've got some of the ideas already cooking and that we can start to build those in right away in the terms of our negotiations with Metrolinx in terms of building the document that will hit the street, and then ultimately the consortium that will come forward and bring LRT to this community.
Colette, you made the point earlier that every community and every major infrastructure project is different, but your community has wrestled with some priorities and has identified some items that to some extent are non-negotiable that you want to achieve. How do you suggest, or how do you encourage this community to be thinking about what's possible, and how do you crystallize the things that you would want to be talking to the key stakeholders about in terms of what we hope to have at the end of this, other than a better transportation system and hopefully a healthier tax base along that corridor through intensification? How do you begin to think about that?
Great question. I mean, I think, as Paul said, I think the first piece is educating people on, what does a build look like? What are the kinds of trades that are going to be coming on site? What are the kinds of jobs that come out the gate first? There, often before a shovel hits the ground, there's draftsmen and administrative jobs and catering for food for people to eat lunch. So it's understanding the industry and the kinds of jobs that are going to be generated, and then what are the kinds of pathways you're going to need to create. If in our instance, for example, we really wanted to make sure that people who maybe never thought about a career in the trades or would even begin to know how to access an apprenticeship program would be able to see what a pathway into this trade would look like and to understand the steps they'd need to take and to be ready when that opportunity, the gate actually opens onto the job. And so in our case, in that instance, it meant we had to figure out in Toronto, which is a really big city, how do we build a construction sector pathway so that we can connect people, the supply, to the eventual demand. If we want contractors and their subs to do this work for us, we've got to make it easy for them to connect with some of the residents that we really want to see have part of that opportunity. So for us, it was understanding the trades. It was understanding what do we have to create, not only for this build, but for future builds. We're supposed to be getting another light rail transit, and there's lots of construction going on in our city. So can we actually start to change how we think about constructions and the opportunity associated with it, whether it's public infrastructure or in some cases private, and build the kind of lasting architecture that we need, like a construction sector pathway, so that we pilot test it with the light rail, the 19 kilometers of light rail transit we're starting to build now, but that it will be there coming for the next one. Yeah.
So Paul, we're going to run out of time, so the last couple of minutes are going to go to you, and I'll play the devil's advocate, because the challenge in this community, it strikes me as somebody who's been part of the odd controversial debate, is that we have on occasion in the past quickly polarized into views that see the world in black or white terms and both sides get entrenched and we don't really talk to one another, and at the end of the day, we manage to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And it strikes me that there are many stakeholders here who see the long-term benefit of a biggest in memory provincial investment in infrastructure here. How do we make sure that that engagement, in fact, invites people to the table, helps to educate folks about what's possible and what isn't, identifies realistically the challenges that we're going to go through, particularly through construction, and gets us to a point where it feels like there's actually a dialogue and some constructive outcomes here, and make sure that we don't miss a once-in-a-generation opportunity to build a better place for our kids.
So one of the ways we do that is to build on the assets we already have. We have some good, strong collaborative groups that have already gone through some of that. What does it take to work together conversations? And whether that's at those type of anchor institution levels, large employers and players, both in the public sector and the private sector in our community, or some of those community-based groups. I've talked about the Poverty Roundtable. There are task force at the city around how we close that skills gap. The mayor himself has come out with a blue ribbon task force around that. So how do we build on what's already there and use some of that local knowledge in order to inform it? And so when I look at what Mohawk College has to offer, when I look at what some of our community-based, neighborhood-based organizations have to offer, even small pilot programs like the Neighborhood Home Improvement Program, which matched unemployed Hamiltonians with a chance to learn about the basics of construction and do projects in their own neighborhood, are all things that we can say it can work. I think if we get bogged down too much in the philosophical piece about how does this transform the world forever, well, let me tell you, LRT doesn't even transform Hamilton forever. It is the first step of a number of things. And so I think community benefits has to be seen in that light. How do we take a major step forward, document some things in, and I have as a bit of a personal challenge that I've taken on, that I also want to know that, as Colette said, the next time we do this, it doesn't take thousands of person hours and large-scale negotiations in 6 years to get into place, that a private developer could turn around and say, as my civic duty, I'm going to take this playbook that's been developed about how it's done right and actually implement it. When you think about the development that'll happen in our harborfront area, when you think about the natural growth that the city is experiencing, the chances to use community benefits is not simply curtailed to LRT. So let's not try and put it all into one project. Let's build it the best way we can and use it in future projects as well.
And sadly, on that note, we're out of time. But it has been a fascinating conversation, and obviously it's one that will be part of a much longer and deeper conversation in this community. Colette Murphy from the Atkinson Foundation, we're so grateful for your time and your wisdom, and we look forward to working with you on our light rail transit journey. And Paul Johnson, as always, we're grateful for your service and your leadership on this tough file. We're going to make something happen here. I'm Terry Cooke. You've been watching Hamilton's Vital Signs. We've been talking about community benefit agreements and light rail transit. As always, you can follow us on Facebook or Twitter. I look forward to being with you next week, or next month, as it were, and thanks for watching.